If I could have everybody's attention for a second, and I'd just like to give a special thanks to Mike Pacifico and Kendra Hicks for getting all this financial data. And now, if we can get all the panel participants up to come up front and have a seat. I'll read out the name, Howie Emmer, Candy Erickson, Ken Hammond, Robin Marks, Mary Ann Jackson, and Dennis O'Neill. Could they all please come up front? You can just scoot. There's 6 chairs there.
I think so. Ken didn't make it then. The red Hawaiian shirt.
Where's Party?
Directions will be in the other room.
So Lake Street is the Labor Temple. Lake Street on the Labor Temple. Mark, go start, man.
I have a Vivitar 28mm lens. Wide on lens. Who did it?
Bobby. I think that's Bobby.
We have all the panel participants, please come up front.
Hello, man. Nice to see you.
He's coming up after the panel, after this panel. Who are these? Howie. Why don't we get started? Let me first point out that each panel participant will have approximately 5 minutes to respond for the points they wish to, and after which there will be an open discussion, and I'd like to point out that this isn't just an open question-answer period for the panel participants, but if anybody, don't feel that you're limited to just asking questions of the panel. Certainly the speakers who spoke earlier, I'm sure they would be happy to respond to questions. But our first speaker, or our first respondent, is Mr. Howie Emmer.
That's good to be good.
We're very well prepared. Whatever someone is saying.
Hey, can we have a...
Say it with a microphone, please.
Yeah.
Say it with a microphone. Stand up when you say it.
Don't I look comfortable? Really, I thought I was going to be last, and here I am first. So I'm trying to collect not only my thoughts, but
Into the microphone.
being. So here I am. I have a mic in my hand, so I'm supposed to use it. So I will. I think. Okay. Well, the first thing I'd like to say is, and I think some of the people have left, and it's probably the second or third time you've heard this already. But the first thing I'd like to do is thank from the bottom of my heart some of the people that impacted on me and made me the person that I was at Kent, because of their participation and their support for the Kent Committee to end the war in Vietnam. And yes, SDS was important, but for 2 years before that, as people have heard, but I need to say it again, there were vigils every Wednesday. There were meetings. there were discussions, and the issues were being brought out, the issues that came to a head on May 4th, 1970. So I'd like to just kind of recognize a few people. And the first person I'd like to recognize is Dr. Dolores Knoll. Dr. Knoll, when... Yeah, could you stand up? Dr. Knoll, recently in the 70s, well, not so recently anymore, I guess the 70s aren't that recently, but compared to 20 years ago, only 10 years ago, in the early 70s, Dr. Knoll was one of the founders of the Kent Gay and Lesbian Fund. Okay, Kent Gay Liberation Front. And I think that was a very courageous stand for her to take, and for a stand that, you know, the other people who formed that group with her to take on this campus. But the reason I want to speak about her is because when we were students in the Kent Committee, it wasn't always easy to get faculty support, especially back then. And she was one of the first faculty members who, especially after we were harassed in demonstrations, she decided it was the time for her to come out and join the demonstrations, and she did so. And she deserves a round of applause. You know, obviously I can't go on with other people because I don't want to take up too much time, but Tony Walsh is another person standing in the back. Ruth Gibson. Let's give her a round of applause. 1965, Ruth took a stand against the war in Vietnam, and in 1985, she's taking a stand against the war against Nicaragua. Right on, Ruth. And Roman Timchishin, who actually... Roman, are you here?
Everybody wants to stand up.
Would you stand up, Roman? Roman was a supporter of what we were doing then, and actually he tells me stuff he did earlier. And actually, he was telling me a horrendous story, which I'm sure is true, about how this year, when he was a teacher this last year, some racist, young white racist students who ended up with overt Nazi literature, later on he found out, helped to push him out of the position he was in here at Kent. But the main, which is terrible, and maybe is something people could do something about it, if there's anything to do. But the main thing I wanted to say is, you know, Roman is another one of the people from the very early days from here. So real quickly, I just want to touch on really two main things. One is this whole issue of nonviolence and so-called violence. And I think it is a very serious issue for our movement. And I don't think there are easy answers. And I think it's something that needs a lot of thought and a lot of discussion. And the main thing, whatever all of us come out of here thinking about it, I think it's really great that some of these real issues that came up in the 60s and are going to be with movements are being discussed. And that's the important thing. I want to throw in my 2 cents. I guess I think that, to me, I don't think movements should limit themselves to any particular tactic, this or the other. I think the context for struggle in this world, not only in this country, but this world, is the devastation caused by entities like U.S. imperialism. Like U.S. imperialism, when you talk about violence, the only government that ever dropped a nuclear bomb in this world, the U.S. government. The same government that murdered more than 1 million people in Vietnam. And that's the context. That's what happened concretely, I think, in the 60s. Things moved from nonviolence, say in the black movement, and beyond, because the government forced people to defend themselves. That's what happened. And it wasn't because people decided we liked violence. Now, Did we sometimes in SDS glorify violence, use all kinds of language that was kind of inflammatory, said some probably unrealistic things? Yes. And I think that's wrong, and we never should have glorified violence. But in the 60s, of all the armed actions that happened, and there were a lot, I mean, Weather Underground wasn't the only one, of all the armed actions that happened, one person, and it was unfortunate, but only one person died in the Army Math Research Center in Madison, Wisconsin. You know, and that death needs to be taken seriously, although actually people tell me that there was a phone call into the Army Math Research Center and the cops didn't pay heed to it. But whatever. You know, and it is something to take seriously. And I think possibly violence can be a corrupting thing on anybody. I think that is a possibility. I think it really matters when, how, whatever it gets used. But to me, it can't be just nonviolence versus nonviolence. There are systems in this world that cause injustice, and what was great about the 60s, with whatever the tactics, is we built a movement of all the levels that people worked on. We built a movement against injustice and for justice. And I think the real terrorists, as Carl Davidson said before, are the people who carry out things like literal genocide against, killing 1 million people in Vietnam. Then, I just want to say one thing about what was achieved in the 60s and our mistakes and everything like that. I think we made serious mistakes. I spoke to some of them last night. I think male supremacy that existed in the movement was really wrong. And I'm glad it's changing today, although there's still problems in that regard. Fortunately, women are building movements these days, are challenging male supremacy within our movements, but also against things like possible overturning of Roe versus Wade. But, that was a real problem. There were real problems. We were immature. There were real problems. But I think, again, the lesson of the 60s to me, as someone said before, is that we acted on the side of justice. That's the biggest lesson to me. And we helped in a successful effort to change the policy towards Vietnam. I think we really changed this country. That's what I think. I think of the 80s, especially the Reagan years. And I think in recent years, the right wing in this country, people who have been opposed to affirmative action, the people who are opposed to reproductive rights, the people who wanted to bomb Nicaraguans, back to the Stone Age, those are the people, Reagan on down, in the government, the new right, who more or less, I really think you'd have to say, been defining the early 80s. I think things are changing now, but I think that's kind of what we've been coming out of. I think things were different in the 60s. I think what was wonderful and beautiful about the 60s was in the 60s what came to be was the black movement, the Vietnamese struggle, our movement, women, gay people, Chicanos, Puerto Ricans, people struggling for their rights and their liberation began to define the terms in society. And it was people who were for war and people who were for racism who were on the defensive. And I think that was great. And I just think that needs to carry through also to today. That lesson that we can change things, that we have to change things, is really important. I've just had one hell of a time seeing people who I haven't seen in a long time. I love everybody. It's so great to see people. And I think what's really important to see is those of us who came out of that era, mainly as someone also said before, we're not Wall Street brokers. We're people who are doing humane things in our lives. I think that's really important to point out. I think it's also true, still, nonetheless, that we still do have a responsibility to act politically and collectively, to change U.S. policy towards El Salvador and let the people there live instead of die at the hands of the death squad, to preserve the rights of women to control their own lives, to support the rights and the very lives of people who are dying of AIDS, to support gay and lesbian struggle, to support third world people in this country. All the issues. Ecology is important. Many people are working in unions. That's important. All the different things that people are doing. I think if this conference can help all of us not only come together as a group from before, but help us recommit to do some things about the problems that are actually being faced in the world, and join and support the movements of today, that's the best thing we can learn from the 60s.
Speak into the mic, please.
Yeah, I should yell. I teach, and all night long when I teach, I yell. So I probably don't need this mic. But I feel a need to try to strike a balance. I absolutely agree with everything that Howie says. And yet I see and I hear that it's easy for us to say some things, and we love to hear some things, and yet we apologize. Like on that poster, it may sound ridiculous, but revolution comes from the greatest love. Why do we have to say that may sound ridiculous? Because we're not used to saying that. We're not used to looking at ourselves and saying, we are people. Oh, Candy, introduce yourself. My name is, actually my name is Carolyn Knox Wynn. Probably forever Candy. But, that at one point in my life, or most of my life, I was a woman who would never have a baby, ever. And that it was a very big step in my life to come to that place where I could see something like having a child as a viable thing to do. There are a lot of parents out here, and they're good parents. Part of what's happening here today, I think, is healing us. If we really are going to, as Howie said, recommit. I'm not sure recommit is the right word, because I'm not sure we're going to have to anything. Maybe, I mean, in a sense, this has to become, we have to heal and make this all useful to us again, relevant to us again. And to do that, we have to have that balance, that patience. We have to listen to each other. We have to, and practice so we can listen to other people. Because where I come from, I live in Oregon, and the struggles that we have in Oregon, I mean, we live in one of the most beautiful rainforests in this country, maybe in this world. And in the town that I live in, it's a terminally hip town. People there have incredible politics, and we consistently elect terrible, awful political leaders, except for, Jesse Jackson, who was, elected by an overwhelming majority of people in our town. But we have this rainforest, and we have a lot of people who understand about rainforests, and then we have a lot of people who are actual loggers out there in the woods who don't understand. The only people who are talking to those loggers are the logging companies. And they tell those loggers, you're going to be out of jobs. And yeah, they are going to be out of jobs. And what does that mean? They're going to be out of jobs whether they cut down the trees or not. If they cut down the trees, they're going to be out of jobs when the trees are gone, and there won't even be any trees. They've got a choice between selectively cutting now and dealing with it now, or just pulling on ahead and shipping the raw logs overseas and not even using the mills, and everybody's out of work and with no consciousness of why any of this is happening. And that's because the people that are living in Eugene are talking to each other because they can't talk to anybody else. We can barely I mean, in this room, how many arguments have you been witness to since you've been here? I mean, how many factions? How many things have been, I mean, it's almost like we're afraid to bring them up. And why? Because, not because we're afraid of arguing, not us. It's just that we're kind of afraid of the process. Because we really love each other, we really need each other. And we don't want to walk away from this place, you know, thinking, what a drag. This was no good. We want to walk away from this place saying, yeah, we can come here and we can come here with our differences and we can get past those, you know, or we can celebrate our differences, you know, to hell with getting whatever, you know. We can move on with differences together.
When you talk about activism, you can talk about what you do every day. Just in living, you can be an activist. You can teach your kids that it's okay to challenge their teachers. The good teachers won't mind a dialogue. Bad teachers don't deserve your respect. Challenge them with the fact that their leaders have consistently voted against every child care food program, every child daycare program, every medical program designed to help people have the life after they're born. It's all too easy to tell people that they have a right to be born, but they have a right to a life, too. In Ohio alone, 48% of the people who work are cut out of medical care. They cannot afford even basic preventative medical, dental, or visual care. And that's wrong. You should support free clinics. You should support the doctors that are willing to work in communities. If you have any extra money, it should go to a clinic. It should go to programs to train doctors who are willing to work in the inner city, willing to work in rural poverty areas. So every day, just to repeat, you can be an activist. Just when you go to work, don't be quiet. When you hear something, answer it. And that's all it really takes to be an activist every day.
Down all sorts of things that I'd like to say. And I think what I'm feeling right now that I'd like to say is I feel so proud of all of my friends, of all of us that were here 20 years ago, of all of you new people that you're new to me, that are here today, of all of the Jack Efforts and Ruth Lentils, and I don't know the rest of the names, people that are visibly older than we are, that set the pace before us. I feel very proud to be a part of all of this. When I first moved out to Oregon, I became very involved in the women's health issues. I started doing a lot of training and teaching women how to take care of their bodies, know about their bodies, pregnancy counseling, abortion counseling, etc. One day I was in the middle of doing some pregnancy counseling, and somebody came up to get me. It was my friend Lucy Parker, and her face was completely white, and she said to me, "Robin, there are 3 men downstairs. They're carrying briefcases. They've got on blue jackets and sunglasses, and they're asking for you." And I told them you were busy, and they said, "Please come get you right now." So I just got somebody else to talk to the woman that I was talking to, and I walked down, and these 3 men escorted me into a room. They were from the FBI. Now, a week before that, Patty Hearst had disappeared. Did anybody else remember Patty Hearst? Well, remember the story, Candy?
She was in my trunk.
Well, I was living on 200 acres out in this rainforest. It was a beautiful place. I had a little house. I had 40 chickens, 3 goats, 3 horses. I was in hot heaven. I'm from New York, so I thought this was just the greatest. Well, I had this goat barn that my goats had been living in, but goats do this thing with their heads where they count things, and the goat barn had fallen down. But there was still kind of a structure there. Well, these men got really straight with me right off the bat. They told me that they knew that I was hiding Patty Hearst in my goat barn. I said, "What are you talking about? I've never met Patty Hearst." They said, "Yeah, sure. And you weren't a member of SDS either, were you?" Then they pulled out these books with pictures of all of my dearest and closest friends. And they said, "This is Rick Erickson." I said, "Yes." They said, "What do you think of this picture of Rick Erickson?" I said, "I don't think it's a very good picture." It's much better looking than that. They systematically went through most of us that had been together here in this movement, Jim and Howie and Bill Whitaker, and they knew where all these people were. At that point, I think Howie was living in Oakland and teaching school. It was right out in the open. I mean, they came to the free clinic and found me. I mean, they knew where all of us were. They wanted me to tell them where everybody was. Well, I wasn't about to do that. So we sat there in this silent match for quite a long time. And they said, "Are you going to tell us where these people are?" I said, "I don't have to. You know where these people are. These people are in the phone book." I have faith in you. If you found me, you can find them. I know you. So that's more or less the end of the story. We ended the silent match. They told me I'd be hearing from them again. They packed all their books. Oh, they were great pictures. I really would have liked the pictures, but they wouldn't like them. They packed them all back into the suitcase when they left, and they said, "You'll be hearing from us." And I went home and checked my goat barn. There was nobody there. There are a couple of things that I wanted to say about my experiences in Kent, because I got so choked up coming back here 2 days ago. I mean, I was in tears. It took me a while to be able to just talk, because it was such a powerful time in my life. It made such an impression on me that I feel like the me that is today, that is the person that I really like and respect and put so much good energy into this universe, comes from the person that was born out of those 4 or 5 years that I spent in this time, when I was forced on every level to examine myself, who I was, what I stood for, what we all stood for, what life was all about. You see, I didn't come from a historical perspective, like many people in this movement. I came from New York. I grew up on Long Island. I came from a pretty wealthy, middle-class family where I was pretty protected, and I didn't think about much of this. Roles were clearly defined in my household. My brother was expected to be a good student because he was a boy. I didn't have to be a good student. I needed to look pretty because I'd get married. And my parents really put that out to me. I mean, I just kind of grew up thinking that it really wasn't important what I knew. I just needed to look all right. That wasn't true at all.
You look pretty good, Rob.
I got here, and Howie was one of the first people I met, and I was taking French classes. I was really involved. My first quarter here, I was an honor student. I was taking junior level French classes. There's a guy named Harry Stewart. He was incredible. I wonder if Harry Stewart's around. He used to smoke French cigarettes and talk about French philosophy, and he was great. I really enjoyed my classes. At the end of my freshman year, the black students had an issue that was happening, and that was at a point in history when the black students really wanted to be separate from the white movement. They were really feeling their power. They really didn't want us connected at that point in time. And at that time, Kent had a pretty large black African population. I don't remember exactly why, but a lot of African students were here. And so the black students were trying to incorporate both a black studies program and an African studies program. And it makes so much sense. I mean, it just made so much sense. And so the black students had gone to the administration and said, so we want this program put in. And they had gone through all this work to outline these courses and organize this whole thing. And the administration flat out said no. The black students fought that for a while, and then finally, I remember them coming to one of our Kent committee meetings. There were a couple of spokespeople from the black movement, and they came to our meeting and they said, we need help. We're going to stage a sit-in, and we really like the white students. We'd like you guys to support us. Please, we're needing help. That was my first action. I thought, how unfair. Why would the administration give these people this program? These people deserve this program, and I mean, what an innocuous thing. What are they so threatened about? So we went to the administration building for the sit-in, and I sat there, and people were speaking, and people were applauding, and it was a really nonviolent situation. And then a spokesperson came out speaking for the administration, board of directors, and President White. And they said, we are going to give you 10 minutes to clear off these steps, and if you don't, we'll have to take action. I didn't know what that meant at all. I just kept sitting there in the thunder, singing songs, and had a great time. But 10 minutes later, they pulled in, I don't know who it was now, I can't remember, troops, billy clubs, and they started arresting people and dragging people off. And that was my first action. And it made me question everything at that point. What is happening here? You didn't have to be a genius at that time to just be in touch with the injustice. What was going on here? So then I started to really read and try and figure out what this was all about. The war was a big issue. I always felt, and I do feel somewhat intimidated, I don't at this moment, but when I was first asked to speak here, I realized that old stuff came up to me, like feeling intimidated at speaking at a political gathering here. Because to speak at an SDS meeting, I felt like I was supposed to be politically correct. And I didn't know what that meant, but I didn't think I was it. So I didn't say that, I didn't consider myself a heavy in the movement because I didn't feel like I was politically correct. But I had all these feelings, and I stuck with the movement the entire time that I was here. I couldn't have told you the date of the 10th offensive, but I knew that napalming people was wrong. I knew the Vietnam War was wrong. I knew that Nazi on campus was wrong. I knew that liquid crystals being developed here was wrong. And it just kept snowballing, action after action. It was such a positive, such a totally positive part of my life. I remember going to Cleveland once for a nonviolent sit-in, and we were sitting there, and all of a sudden, cops came in our forces and were actually about to run us over. This was a pretty eye-opening experience for somebody who'd been sheltered from this type of thing most of my life. Although when I was very little, my dad was a writer, and he went down and interviewed Martin Luther King in jail, and came back singing this man's glory, and so I was up somewhat on the civil rights movement. But this was all a new experience to me. I don't want to get long-winded. I know that people get tired. There are just a couple more points I'd like to make. One was that in terms of SDS, and I do want to deal with the issue of violence or militancy or whatever you want to call it, I just wanted to say how it affected me. After we had become SDS, I felt like that was a big change in the movement here. I felt like that's where, if we made some mistakes, our mistakes came in. And I don't want to shadow anything I'm saying mistakes. I just want to acknowledge them. I felt like when we became SDS, one of the things that happened is we got a little more dogmatic. words like individualistic and counter-revolutionary were being thrown around, I think, very carelessly, so that parts of our own creativity were being labeled as negative. And I felt like I had to hide parts of myself. As an artist, I wanted to learn how to play the recorder. Those were things that were being frowned upon. And I don't think that we have to put away our creativity. I think our creativity is what takes the movement and makes it fly and makes it appealing to other people. It's the magnetism that we have. Also, at one point, we broke up into collectives in different cities in Oregon. I mean, in Ohio, sorry. And I went to Akron. I lived in a house with many other people. The house was great. We had a really, really good thing going. We were working in an ex-rubber workers community. We were really visible in the community because everybody else were kind of nuclear families, blue-collar families, and here we were this bunch of rowdies living in this house. But people really liked us. They liked us a lot, and they'd ask us what we were doing, and we would tell them. I was working in a Lebanese bar meeting, and I was supporting the house. Everything I made went to pay the rent on the house. We were having a great time. And one night at one of our meetings, the issue came up of buying guns so that we could practice sniper attacks on police, on pig cars. Let's practice sniper attacks on pig cars. And it was at that meeting that I stood up and I said, this isn't for me. I can't do this. This is not my path on this planet. And I didn't know whether it was right or wrong. It's a conflict I've been dealing with up till this very meeting tonight in my life. And that's the point at which I left. What I wanted to say is that I felt that we had those people in that community in our hand. They were ready to listen to us. They would have listened to everything we said. They liked us. And it never did happen. That never did happen in those houses. But I think it would have been a mistake had it, because those people were open to us. They wanted to know. They wanted to improve the quality of their lives. They were making pittance. Life in Akron was no fun. They weren't getting what they deserved. So they would have listened. They would have been mobilized. And I felt like I had more patience and maintained my own bonds because I achieved that in that community. Unfortunately, that's not the kind of after the shootings, we all scattered like sparks. There was a rumor that came down the day after the shootings here that they didn't know, the administration didn't know who did it, but if there were any SDSers around, they were going to round us up and arrest us for inciting to riot because they couldn't figure out what had happened. And so at that point, I gathered my stuff and I left. And I feel like this weekend is kind of gathering the sparks and seeing people that have been so important in my life, in my growth, positive time in my formation and my development. I don't think that there's any reason why we can't be, or why we shouldn't be active in so many different ways, and there's so many different levels. Yes, there are all the global issues. I'm not going to run through them again just because of so much time. I really appreciated what Mary Ann said. Where I live, I'm real active in the sanctuary movement. We're an organization called CAL, Person Waiting Concern, bringing people up from Central America and fighting for asylum. I'm interested in the town I live in being a nuclear free zone. I work with migrant workers. I work with handicapped people, developmentally disabled people. I mean, my life is out there. I think that one of the most important things that I can do every day is raise my children to be good human beings, so they know how to handle life on this planet. And I'm going to end here just by telling you one funny thing. And it's really funny, and when you think about it, I want you to laugh. And then I just want you to keep it in your minds, because it's important. I was on my way home from work one day last week, and I was listening to NPR. A lot of you listen to NPR. Yay! I was listening to NPR, and they had on this satirical songwriter. And the song was called "Freedom's Just Another Word for Working on Your Tan." And
Oh, no.
all I want to say is, let's make that a joke. Let's keep freedom alive by keeping involved.
New York University uptown campus, very important distinction in case any of you lousy downtown campus people are here. And I think part of the reason I got on is I wrote this little pamphlet that's a history of SDS a while ago, so that's a plug. And having said that, we were set up as a panel to respond to what the speakers this morning said, and I don't think any of us really felt like responding directly, point by point, you're right, you're wrong, you're full of shit, you're wonderful, or this is good and this is bad, but what I think is really right, and that's X or Y. And I think the people this morning spoke with more eloquence and certainly with more insight than I'm capable of coming up with. And I think that what I wanted to do instead was address myself a little bit to the people who are here from the student movement of today. We've been doing some summation, really for our own selves to help us understand what it was we did, why we did it, what that means we should be doing now. And I think that we should say a few words to people who are here from the May 4th Task Force here in Kent, from the Progressive Student Network, and there are people here in addition to Kent from Chicago, Minnesota. There are people here from DC SCAR, Boston, there you go. There are people here from UCAR, from Michigan. And what I want to say first off is, I've found, in talking with people, you've been hearing us relive our glory days, when we helped end the war, when we helped change the world, and everybody, even when they're doing criticism and citing the things we did wrong, everybody here has said how proud they were to have been a part of it, how important it was in their lives. Well, it was for me too. I would not take an inch away from that. But I think it would be very dangerous for people who are in the student movement today to feel cheated, to feel like, geez, if I'd been back there doing this when it was Woodstock, when it was, we don't get to burn down dirty Razzi buildings in 2 weeks. You guys have all the fun. Okay? I think there's a real problem here. I made the Woodstock reference. Let me just, on music, there's a thing, partly because all the radio stations are aimed at our generation.
No, it's not.
Supposedly have money, they're playing all the classic rock, and I think kids are all now listening to, the Dead, and Aretha, and the Doors, and so on. It's great stuff. You should be into it, but getting everything. You listen, you've got, just now, you've got Tracy Chapman and Michelle Shock. You've got Stetsasonic, Public Enemy. You got APPLE, you got Metallica, you got New Model Army, Living Color, Bobby Zipper, Alpha Flight. There's great stuff out there now. And you all should be teaching us old people about this stuff. We're nervous. To take the metaphor back, I don't think it's a very far distance to take the metaphor back from music to, sort of more direct political stuff. What we're trying to do here today is give you some of our history. This is what we did, all right? The lessons are for you to do with what you want, for you to learn from. We can't tell you what to do. We don't even agree with ourselves entirely. What was right, what was wrong, what were mistakes, what were, daring triumphs. You take our lessons and you have to apply them to your tasks, because you've got tasks that history is set out for you right now. It's not like there isn't anything to struggle around, and it's not like students don't make a difference. The anti-apartheid movement, the giant upsurge on campuses in this country, which occurred only 3-4 years ago, was one of the major offensives and major victorious offensives that the American people undertook during the entire Reagan era. That series of struggles, which was black-led and campus-based, smashed the whole thing of constructive engagement, which the government was trying to put through. Students did that, not, back in the glory days. Look at the papers. This year, people have thrown the CIA off campuses. In New York right now, or maybe it's changed. When I left New York Wednesday, people were occupying offices or whole buildings 9 different campuses in the CUNY system protesting a tuition hike. And I think most important, the last year, 2 years have seen a huge upsurge of campus struggle against racism and against the resurgence in racism that's been actively promoted during the entire Reagan era. And in terms of people remember from the various speakers this morning, everyone emphasized that SDS, what we were, what we did, owed everything to the black student movement. That's where it got its start, and I think that people should pay attention to that lesson and think about it. Someone told me since I got here that Ked is now 3.5% black. I mean, that's down by 50% from maybe 8 years ago. You all should do something on this, I think. You got to figure it out for yourself. But the final thing I want to say on this is a tribute to the students today that it was, you know, we did all these big and glorious things, and they were important. When we were coming up, it was relatively easy to get involved in the movement. We were a part of a generation, a social tie. There was music, social mores, clothes, drugs, culture, politics. It was part of a whole that this is not to take away from the sacrifice or the struggle or the heroism or anything of what people did, because it was all there. But to walk in that door was not particularly difficult, right? We're in a very different situation now, and people who are campus activists today, in my way of thinking, are the real heroes. It ain't easy when you're at a place where the business administration building is universally regarded on the campus as the moral equivalent of the Taj Mahal. Figuring out the best way to change the world. And that's a hard thing to do going against the current as people are. So I'd like to just sort of close off by asking the veterans, avoid the senior citizens among us here, to give a hand to the students.
Maybe I'm in a war. We said we'd open it up for open discussion. Is there any? She had a hand up for me.
Directly related to that, I, after 20 years being a carpenter, having a dirty hand, working with people, having a great time doing it, I've gone back to school, and I go to University of Massachusetts, a school where the black population is also less than it used to be. And there's a lot of discussion about racism. But in the last 2 weeks, it's been very interesting because students have occupied buildings twice around issues of military research. Over 50 students have been suspended, and that still goes on. It might be happening today. And I also heard just as I was leaving on the radio on Friday that the student government voted not to renew Coca-Cola's contract with the vending machines in the whole university because of their participation in the party. Although I cannot take not the slightest bit of credit for it at all because I haven't been involved with that particular thing. It's really great. And the conversations I've had with young people in the university have been very encouraging. Their interest in those issues, the social issues, their interest in the world, their interest in the organization and the power elite versus the rest of us. And I think that there are real opportunities right now for people to build bridges, to have dialogue, to work together, to consider ourselves as one people, regardless of who we vote for president or anything like that, and to look for the doors of commonality, look for the moral issues that we can agree on, particularly at the 1-to-1 level, the 1-to-5 level, the 5-to-5 level. In other words, where you live, where you work, is where it's at. And just one more thing, is that what Carl was saying about getting maybe being off track or being lost. I think that, yeah, that was true to a certain extent. We did kind of get lost, but I remember when I first moved to Cambridge from Vermont many years ago, it took me a good 6 months to learn my way around town, and I never would have learned my way around at all if I hadn't been willing to get lost first.
And I was very overwhelmed by this wonderful big compliment and a lot of pressure that we are real heroes and heroines. Put a lot of pressure on us, but I think we can go forth. But what I wanted to say is that I've always wanted to be back in the 60s, and Woodstock was the thing I always wanted to do, but I was a bit too young, and so I don't think my parents would let me go up there. But I really thought about this and about being for the student movement. Is that I'm kind of glad I'm not in your generation, because we have your history to build upon. And I've learned a whole lot this weekend, and to tell you the truth, a lot of myths about SDS being a militant group here on campus, and a lot of students outside the normal group right here are a little concerned. And the thing is that these folks are very much more people, especially going to the slide presentation. So they're really open, they're just like us, and they've been a couple years ago, as Robin said, and Robin gave us a good compliment for hosting, and we both come here. We're glad we got our together and sponsored this reunion. So I just want to say thank you for building a foundation for us and the people back in the 1950s too, because I know that was a big struggle. And then building our foundation, and yes, it is harder now, especially with a lot of conservatism being around here. But you also give us a sense of support, because you're out there. I mean, you're probably the majority. There, hopefully, the majority out there in different ways. We just have to find you, because I know I'm out in the working world, and it's really hard to pick up people who are more politically active, but you want to hit all the other people too that are just more politically involved like we are. And it's a real struggle. It's a struggle on campus, but it's much more of a struggle off the campus and into the real world, because you don't have the common friends that you have on your campus. Campus is a safe way to be a political activist. At least that's from my point of view being a recent graduate. So build all your ties, and that's what we need to do as a student movement. So I just want to say thank you, and thanks for the great compliment. So I think we deserve, us young men, should give you a round of applause too for going through that wonderful hell.
I was a radical in the period of student radicalism without ever being a student. And I'll explain a little bit about it. My parents were left trade unionists in New York City. And that's where I joined the anti-war struggles after being in many other struggles from the end of the 50s and all through the 60s. And we had an anti-draft organization going on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. We used to take the people's names who belonged to the draft board, and we put them on stickers with their name, address, and telephone number. It said on the bottom of the stickers, these are the people who are sending our children to die in Vietnam. And I think they had odd numbers like 13 or 15 on each draft board, and they started to quit. They started to resign because there were phone calls and harassing demonstrations, and there was all kinds of problems about keeping a draft board together when the community knew who was sending their kids to war. Most draft boards function anonymously. And it was about that time that they drafted a number of the people involved in this struggle, and I was one of them, and I went into service. I was against the war in Vietnam, and I brought my ideas and activities into the service with me. And you'd be surprised how many soldiers felt exactly like the people on the outside, except they just didn't understand what to do about it, or what kind of recourse there was, or whether working with other people in the movement was possible. Well, we proved it was possible. I was one of the people that helped organize the Fort Hood 3, and it was good that it was called the Fort Hood 3 because that's where they did basic training, and that's where the Army looked, and that's where we were not, and it allowed us to continue to work in Fort Gordon, Georgia. And we did our community work outside of the service while we were soldiers in SNCC in Atlanta every other weekend. And so we were very much involved in the struggle against the war while we were soldiers, and did a number of things. Some of the people that I've spoken before, I haven't seen Bernadine since we had anti-draft counseling in Manhattan when I got out of the service in 1967, and it's been quite an experience. It's been very enjoyable. But I want to just say, I'm an auto worker. I work in Cleveland's foundry, Ford's foundry, by the airport in Cleveland. I've been there 15 years. And I want to say for the continuity of the struggle from the 60s to today, and I think more of what this brother said, this postal worker from New York needs to be said and defined in different ways. Belong to an organization. Express your radicalism, express your differences with the policies of this government, of your community, with an organization. Don't be so quick to do it by yourself. The American people have had enough of the garbage that they've had forced down their throat. Not enough medical benefits, not enough child care benefits. 75% of the kids in Chicago are forced out of school before they graduate. And it's like that in every major public school system. There are grievances a mile wide and deep amongst the American people. The discussions that we've heard here about whether to go underground and with weapons, etc. Make your ties with the community. You're going to make mistakes, but keep building them and keep them going strong. There is miles of ideas and support for the things you will raise and the things you will understand better because your neighbors raised them. College campuses in many instances have a unique opportunity to set off the spark of the grievance of the general society. Just look at China. Right now, the Chinese community, the Chinese people have some very difficult things that they want to change. And because of Chinese culture and Chinese history, they are having some rough times, but the students are being able to part the water. They're being able to raise the consciousness. The leadership is being forced to be very humane so far in dealing with the grievances and the leadership of the movement of the Chinese people. And if I'm not mistaken, in the last demonstration I saw on TV, there were writers in the front ranks of the demonstrators who have been raising these questions in news media and have been rebuffed and put down and stuff. So, you know, when the working class starts to get moving, the issues will be dealt with. Students are, you know, Carl raised a question about some of the struggle. I worked in the SDS Newark project with Tom Hayden right before I was drafted. And everybody that I worked with was so sad about me being drafted. They were much more upset than I was. They were crying, and I was losing some friends, and they thought for sure I was going to die. And, you know, I didn't see it that way. I didn't think it was a nice thing, but I was gonna stand up to it and get through, muddle through something. But the people who have to go through the trying times that we're forced into, because of you know, the problems with not having our needs met in society. Students' relationship to them is like a spark on dry grass or on dry hay in many instances. And I think this is one of those periods in American history when these things are coming together, and that students can play a very special role in fighting for the right to be educated, the right to have work once they're getting education. If you see the extent in which kids are thrown out of high school, forced out of high school, they say, pushed out of high school, you got to know that it's an organized plan of our society, that they don't want educated unemployed in the streets of this country. So they make sure that the children who are not going to work don't get an education. And I think it's important to fight for the continuity between the rights of going to school and the raising the issues of the wrongs of society, as students will, in a very fresh, sparkling kind of way, and related to the organizational struggles of many decent organizations who you've heard spoken here, from environmental groups to medical groups. I belong to the UAW, and they've taken some very fine positions on many things. Unfortunately, we want to move them more in the direction of some basic challenges to the problems of working people face in this country, especially in the plants of the UAW. This seems to be the thing that our leadership comes last to. But I want to say that it's been very exciting being here and listening to what's been going on, and keep on building the organizations that you're part of, and don't let anybody tell you that it's not as revolutionary or it should be, or the different kind of differences that we do have. Express it with the broadest possible number of people in your community, in your school, in your shop, etc. And we'll be down the road together soon.
I said to the cashier there, this is really a great country because I can buy the Workers' Vanguard on a gold card. The fact is that it's not as great a country as we're all told. This is a good antidote for me because, especially being away from a lot of my old friends, there's a tendency to get very maudlin about the way things have been going, particularly when the news media has celebrated the end of the Cold War and we won. And indeed, capitalism is rampant all over the face of the earth, and it's the best thing that has ever happened to mankind, and somehow rationally fits our needs. But there was an article by Alexander Coburn recently in The Nation, and he quoted a Christian missionary, and I believe it was writing from a favela in Brazil. It may have been anywhere in Latin America or Central America. And the church worker goes to a little girl and says, "Have you eaten recently?" And the little girl says, "Oh yes, Mommy made cakes for us the other day out of newspapers," because the newspaper fills them up. And if you look at any quarter of the third world, precisely that kind of phenomena are going on. And it's also happening in our own country with one index just being the infant mortality rate. So certainly they proclaim that they've got the best of all possible systems, but there's evidence all around us daily that that's simply not the case. I think that for the younger people here today, one of the speakers mentioned that don't be nostalgic about the old days, go out and do it. Well, in a sense, I can empathize because I came to Kent in '72, and at that point, some of the people that had been active before were still around, but things were already ebbing, and I felt in a sense cheated that I wasn't part of that upsurge. But given the fact that nothing has been solved in terms of some of the fundamental problems that face people, if you can just grasp a hold of the fact that there is a distinguishable, definable enemy, the things that happen don't happen because of some kind of systems that move through some kind of divine order. They're made by people. There are people that profit from it. There are people that live well because of it. They're people that cold-bloodedly decide that others will die if they will perpetuate their rule. You can grasp that and direct your struggle accordingly. I think that you'll find that extremely rewarding because, if nothing else, when you look back on your youth, if you have an opportunity to say that I wasn't just made by events, but tried in some small way to shape them, you not only will have contributed something to the world, but I think you can walk away with a certain satisfaction. Thanks.
I want to make this really brief. There have been a number of really important things said this morning, and I think maybe most important has been two things. One, speaking to the fact that the 60s were shaped by, politically shaped, in the entire country, in fact, large portions of the world, by the struggle for liberation and the struggle for revolution, and upholding that is something that in 1989 is an extremely important act. Second, I was really glad to hear Martha in particular speak to the influence of struggles for liberation going on in oppressed countries, particularly Africa, and their role in giving rise to the battles that shaped this country in the 60s. But there's one thing that wasn't brought up, and that I think is important to bring up now, and that's the role of the revolution in China in shaping all of those struggles. And in fact, in the years 1968-69, I was part of demonstrations in California where hundreds of people, particularly black people, were raising Mao's Red Book. I'd be willing to bet that there's still large numbers of people in this room who hold on to their Red Books and hold on to some glimmer of a future. I want to say that there's a party in this country that actually came out of the movements of the 60s, both the Black Liberation Movement and the movements on the campuses. The Revolutionary Communist Party, based on Mao Zedong, on Lenin, and on Marx, and that party is seriously preparing, politically preparing today for revolutionary war in the United States. Their newspaper is here, the Revolutionary Worker newspaper. We have a table set up right outside the door, and we have a video on the history of that party and its vision of the future. And I want to call on anyone who's seriously looking towards what are the forms of revolutionary change that we can get our hands on and actually make today, to check out that table, check out our literature, and watch the video later today.
That's right.
Hey, my name's Ben Troxel. I'm from Hiram College, and just in case anybody's wondering, I'm constantly I want to address some of the comments made about violence and this whole kind of argument, I guess, if you will, going on. A lot of this stuff started up at the Pentagon, Pentagon blockade, the Guardian, and I was there for that, and I sort of kept up with it. A lot of this stuff, I think, is just a matter of, it's a linguistic problem, like violence. How do you define the term? And, you know, there it's just like what language game you're playing. And there's a couple of language games here that, you know, are possible. And I think a lot of the arguments, I mean, they end up working into the hands of those that have power. You're playing along with their art, you're playing along with their language games, allowing them to set the terms for what kind of struggle is legitimate and what kind of struggle isn't. Any change of power relations involves some coercion, and that includes like civil disobedience, nonviolent civil disobedience. You're trying to coerce somebody into, you know, having your idea. You know, you want them. I mean, you're not arguing with them. You're trying to change their consciousness, which is, you know, you could look at it as a form of coercion. And you know, the whole thing is like, hey, nobody's innocent, nobody's clean. You know, everybody who pays taxes is involved with violence. You ever call a cop if you get robbed? You know, the cop carries a gun and a badge. You know, you're involved with violence. If you're born into this society, you're involved with violence. So nobody's clean, you know, and I think that in allowing ourselves to like say like what kinds of struggle are legitimate and what kinds of struggle aren't, you know, we're not really helping ourselves at all. You know, I think that, you know, we have to basically say, you know, hey, whatever means somebody uses to go about their own liberation, hey, you know, that's from their standpoint, and it might be very different from your own, but you know, that's their thing, and that's what I wanted to say.
5 or 10 more minutes. I haven't kept track of hands. Who has their hands up there? Now, for some of us, this is a reunion, and I'm one of those people. For me, one of my first actions in terms of black and white organizational groups was the education I got at the Democratic Convention in Chicago. Okay? Yeah, a lot of people from here were participants in that. The education I got at the CIA recruiting here on campus, which was a joint action and a demonstration that both blacks and whites did together. I think as the history gets written of activism, I think both blacks and whites participated jointly in actions for our mutual education and support. We supported white radicals and they supported black radicals, and that's the way it should be. I think that as we look towards the 90s and the turn of the century, I think we get caught up in a lot of lack of class consciousness. Okay? What we're looking at in America is new terms like buffy and yuppie, and people who have access to education, and medical care, and housing, and food, and the right to work. I think as university students, you are privileged in many areas and in many cases. And I think one of the responsibilities of privilege is to take that education and turn it around to help the less fortunate. Okay, and the less fortunate in this country are no longer black, Latino, and third world Asian. Okay, the less fortunate are very often working class white poor, and a lot of people don't see them. Okay, you know, a lot of people don't see them as homeless. A lot of people don't see them as unemployed. A lot of people don't see them as lacking medical care. I think the struggle of the 80s and the 90s is not just on the world scale, but on the domestic scale. Okay, you know, when Bush says a gentler and kinder nation, what he means is more profits for the wealthy. You know, that are unprotested and unsupervised and unaccounted for. Okay, and I think that we have a responsibility to bring issues to the forefront of greater access for minorities as well as majority people to education. You know, homeless people need homes, they don't need shelters. You know, those are issues that we need to deal with. And like I said, I'm really glad to be here and see a lot of people I haven't seen in 20 years. And I think the term that they say in Africa in Portuguese is "a luta continua," the struggle continues.
Yeah.
I don't have a long speech, so I'm not going to bore you or anything. It's a great subject. It's a subject that the left has never addressed. I might have trouble using that too. And we in the Irish community feel a little cut off from the left wing. I was in SDS in 67 to 69 at Urbana College, and we came up here to Kent for the regional. But the Irish community is asking you to do two things. One is to write letters to your state senators if you live in Ohio. We're trying to pass the McBride Principles, which is, in Ohio, is currently Senate Bill 37. And what it calls for is an end to discrimination by American corporations in the north of Ireland. their corporations. So we'll boycott Ford if you plan to go on black arm. Keep that in mind. The other thing is, and this is really sad because I never hear about it in any of the left publications. That's the case of Joseph Patrick Doherty. He's been held in the United States prison for 6 years, and he has never been brought to trial. He is a member of the Irish Republican Army, and that is why he is being held, and the United States government is holding him here, no trial, 3 federal court judges, his orders is released, they continue to hold him. If you would simply write your United States congressman and tell him you want Joe Doherty released, we would appreciate it. Thank you.
I have a great many things that I could say, but actually I'm just going to confine myself to what the brother just stood up said. Because I think that this struggle in Northern Ireland, or the north of Ireland, I should say, shows that when things reach a certain level, when the struggle reaches a certain level in a country, then people use the kind of means that they have to in order to win. And I think that's basically what it comes down to. That's one of the lessons that I've learned over the last 20 years in this country. But I wanted to say, that just as a general comment, but the brother probably would want all of us to read The Irish People. And I don't know, do you have any copies of that paper here with you today?
No, I don't.
Okay, but it's a very good publication that talks about the struggle in the north of Ireland. And I also just wanted to let Brother know and other people kind of an additional comment on the Joe Doherty situation, that one brother who was here spoke just a few minutes ago, who talked about the importance of organization. I think that's absolutely true. Because on our own, it is very difficult to accomplish things. But when you act in concert with other people, I mean, that's, I think, one of the cardinal lessons that we have to learn from the 1960s, the need to maintain organizations. But you can get an awful lot done. And I'm proud in this regard that my own union, the Public Employees Federation, our international affiliate is the Service Employees International Union, in our 1988 convention passed a resolution, overwhelmingly, we had about 800 delegates, I think 600 of the 800 people who voted in favor of a resolution condemning the imprisonment of Joe Doherty and calling for his freedom.
I hate to limit it, but let's say 3 or 4 more speakers. Well, actually, we have about 5 minutes.
One thing I wanted to say, and actually the last speaker about Joe Doherty reminded me, that there are right now a lot of people in prison. I think a lot of people know this. There are probably over 100 political prisoners within the United States. And a whole national human rights campaign has been launched to try to secure their freedom. And it ranges from people who have been fighting for independence for Puerto Rico to people who are still in jail from the 1960s as part of the Black Liberation Movement. And I think there are probably a fair number of North Americans who are in jail, who I think probably a lot of people in this panel, like Linda Evans, Laura Whitehorn, Judy Clark, Kathy Boudin, Alan Berkman, I can't remember all their names. Bernadine, who else? Okay,
David
anyway,
Gilbert.
we have
There's a
the
long
addresses here. The conditions they've been subjected to are horrendous. I think that there's Amnesty International, different people have gone to visit like the Lexington Control Unit in Lexington, Kentucky, and said that they're being subjected to psychological torture in an attempt to try and destroy these people as human beings. A lot of them are now being held in the MCC, the correctional centers in the D.C. County Jail, subjected to 23 hours of harassment. And I think that, you know, as a movement, maybe people agree, maybe people don't agree with what they did, but I think we can never abandon people who have been locked up in jail and say, well, too bad for them. I think we have to write to them. I think we have to demand an end to their treatment. Actually, I think we have to demand an end to the treatment that all prisoners in this country are routinely subjected to. And I just think it's really, really important. So, as I said, I do have the addresses of all the above-mentioned 100 100 prisoners, if anybody's interested in writing to them, and especially people that knew them. And actually, anybody, I think they'd really appreciate hearing from you. So thanks.
Ask everybody who wants to say something right now. We've kind of flipped things around, and we decided to go with the student panel on student activism today, right? For the next, as the next topic.
No, Mark
Then
Rudd.
go with
No,
Mark
Mark
Rudd
Rudd.
after that, since,
No, I agree with you.
because you know we've already seemed like we've floated into current topics and so forth. The people who have their hands up, would you mind holding off until the panelists have something to say, because it's basically going to revert right back to topics, current topics, and if what you have to say has to deal with current topics, maybe you should hold off. If you have something that relates back to SDS and so forth, if you'd like to say it now, please, you're more than welcome. Yeah. That doesn't have, is not in regard to current events or that wouldn't be in relation to the spirit panel, please come on now. This gentleman is... My name is Bruce Wright, and my experience is...
Speak louder. Into the mic.
My name is Bruce Wright, and my experiences at the age of 28 are somewhere between the experiences of those who were in SDS and those in the present day. There has been a certain amount of continuity in the student activist movement. I, for example, when I was at the University of Oregon in 1985, 1986, participated in two demonstrations against apartheid to help the Confederates. They both had a large number of people and successfully shut down the building. At the same time, there were similar demonstrations in Berkeley, California. So it really has been sort of a continuing movement, just that it has not become broadly in the press. For example, even though the entire lobby and the entire building were surrounded out in Oregon, the press coverage really was basically minimal, and there was really no coverage in Oregon of the Berkeley demonstration. So a large part of this is just a question of disseminating the information. And through that, basically, the movement can be continued and can build momentum. The critical thing is just to get the word out to people. The critical thing is just to make sure that the press is attracted, just to get the news media involved, basically. So, in case anyone here is not, there hasn't been any activity between SDS and now, the struggle has been continuing and it will continue.
My name's Phil Allenbrough, and known as Free Me to some of you. In fact, what I did was we had Free Angela, Free Bobby, and all that, and Free Abby. And so I got indicted in 1025, so in the back of my denim jacket I just wrote Free Me. Tom Gray started calling me Free Me, so, and free for short, actually. What I want to say, I will first of all acknowledge Tom Luff, because Tom has been a really dedicated man, and he was with that committee, and he was protecting the government. I was a little kid when Howie Emmer had his fist up in front of UI, and I thought, man, there's the neatest guy in the world. So afterwards, and I still think he's the neatest guy in the world. Well, and we all are, by the way. So I had the fall of '70, I had a greaser party at my apartment, and I invited my hero, Howie Emmer. And I said, you know, Howie, you're my hero. You know, he said, here I was, you know, little undergraduate. Howie said, Bill, you're my hero. And that did, you know, that's like kind of acknowledgement that we gave to you students. You're our heroes, you know, you current students today. And we love you. You really are great. And the other thing I want to say is, you know, it was Candy, and what was your name who was sitting right here? Marianne, you, Robin, you said something really neat I want to expand on a little bit, is I think you're talking about the dogmatism and the sectarianism of the left. And I think and Jerry Perskin and I were just talking about this, I think what's neat about it today is, you know what? We are so much more loving, and that's where it's at. And we accept each other, and hey, I'm a freelance leftist, man. And we're men. And I think that I've learned, I've been living in a Buddhist country in Thailand. I learned some sweetness and humility, which is something that we can all learn. And a lot less of this Western ego and male ego that gets in the way of things. And I really do love you, and I love Abby Hoffman too. God bless you, sir.
Before we, yeah, I just want to, we live in an age where people don't read books anymore. We came here, we got the news from one another, we talked to one another. Throw away your TV, read books, talk to one another.
Panel, we're going to take a 3-minute break, but this is my last opportunity to throw in what I want to say. And that is, I've done a lot of work over the semester over educational rights, and I feel that not only do we need open access to education in all segments of society, but we need to revolutionize education, and therefore evolutionize education so it fosters individuality. I don't think people realized 40 years ago, in the late 40s and the early 50s, when they implemented national goals and interests into our school system as the educational goals, that would impede and retard personal goals and interests. And I think that's what has happened. I think we have to get back down to an educational system that fosters individuality and creativity, not this authoritarian structure. But that's it. 3 minutes.
Just time to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, you get a photo. Dad's on the FBI file. I'll give it to you. I will give it to
Get some wrong. You have a novice speaker. Who did they give the honorarium to? Blank check. They give this guy a blank check and said, "Here, cash it if you can." I'm done.
everything in the file? Yeah. Oh,
They've got 6 buildings today. Have you guys been reading the paper? It's not even reading the paper. People aren't reading it.
We're gonna be nice. Don't worry about us. It's okay for the other one. Not here, not at
I always get that. That's one way. Yeah, I think it's more important. Coming in, sit down, and quiet. I have two announcements to make. First of all, there's maps outside for the party, and if you can share maps with a bunch of people, we would greatly appreciate it if you're letting them know. And second of all, it's from several people have come up to us and said that they appreciate it if you're going to smoke, either to go in the room next door or go out in the hallway, because it's a lot of people in here, I guess, are allergic to smoke and it's really bothering them. And it's courtesy to them. We all appreciate it. Well, I have a little story since I didn't want to take time earlier. I'm Robin, I'm from Kent, and as two of the women were talking, just beforehand, they were saying how one of the things you can do is teach your children the qualities that they were trying to teach America. And I guess I'm one of those children. I was taught by my mother to believe in human life and she taught her children to respect other people, and that if we saw injustice, to correct it. And though my mother might not always agree on the tactics that I did to help further people's lives, maybe she wasn't considered an activist the way some of you all are, but I don't know, this may sound really stupid. I don't know, I feel as my activism is a tribute to her and the activism that she did to educate her children and our community. So, and I now is the student panel, and let's see. We have Pam Madison from UConn, United Coalition Against Racism from Ann Arbor, Ray Davis from DC SCAR, DC Student Coalition Against Apartheid and Racism, Joe Eisbacher from PSN in Chicago, and Kim DeFranco from PSN in Kent, who's also a member of the National Steering Committee. So I'll just let them speak and go on my head.